Welcome everyone. Thank you for tuning in to today's news report for day 329 of the war in Ukraine. You are listening to The Account. Today I have another article I want to point out, this time by the Kyiv Independent. The news are dominated by the tragic events in Brovary, Kyiv Oblast. We will go over the latest updates first before moving on to the minor updates grouped as usual into the situation inside Ukraine, Russia and Belarus and the international developments. Nothing significant was reported out of the occupied territories today, so we will be skipping that part. As usual though, we start with the flashpoints along the front. Soledar. Soledar seems to be turning into a graveyard for Russia. Today several videos were shared on social media showing Ukrainian artillery targeting Russian soldiers in trenches and buildings. The scenes are sometimes rather gruesome and show dozens of dead soldiers. Bakhmut. Russia once again claimed Opytne is captured. It is doubtful the situation has really changed. Klishchivka seems to be the main focus for Russia now. Attacks on the settlement won't stop. And now for the article by the Kyiv Independent I wanted to point out, titled Harder Than Ever: How Power Outages Affect People with Disabilities in Ukraine. Power outages have impacted practically everyone across Ukraine. For many, it has been difficult to try and lead somewhat normal lives. The article takes a look at those who are often forgotten, the people with disabilities and those with severe illnesses and their daily struggles as their lives have become even more challenging. Please give it a read. And now we will begin the news segment with the tragic events in Brovary, Kyiv Oblast. During the morning today, a helicopter crashed near a kindergarten in Brovary, Kyiv Oblast. Reports about killed and injured vary, but the Ukrainian State Emergency Service claims the following. As of 3:45 p.m., rescue operations were complete. 14 people were killed, including one child, and all 9 people on board of the helicopter. 25 civilians, including 11 children, were injured and taken to the hospital. The people on board included Interior Minister Denis Monastyrsky, his deputy Yevgen Yenin, and the ministry secretary Yuri Lubkovich. Volodymyr Timoshko, head of the National Police in Kyiv Oblast, said the helicopter was en route to Kharkiv, one of the hotspots in Ukraine. The National Police has asked witnesses of the crash to please contact them to provide statements and evidence. President Zelensky said, "My condolences to all the relatives and friends of the victims. Denis, Yevgen, Yuri, the team of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, true patriots of Ukraine, rest in peace. May all whose lives were taken by this dark morning rest in peace." Meanwhile, Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal announced the head of the National Police, Ihor Klimenko, will serve as acting Interior Minister. He also asked for people not to spread theories and speculations while the investigation is ongoing. Please wait for official statements. The mayor of Brovary, Ihor Sapochko, has announced a 3-day mourning period for the victims of the helicopter crash. Moving on to the minor news updates, starting with the latest out of Ukraine. A new disinformation campaign has started targeting Ukrainians and, of all things, their dogs. Russian sources have begun sharing photos of leaflets regarding the mobilization of strong dog breeds in Ukraine. Regarding the tragedy in the city of Dnipro, 12 bodies remain unidentified so far. Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal is concerned about the slow progress regarding the selection of a new and independent head for the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, a key requirement set by Ukraine's Western allies regarding further aid and joining the EU further down the line. Ukrenergo reports that a significant power shortage remains in the Ukrainian grid and therefore 8 regions continue to suffer from emergency power outages. The Maramures Express between Ukraine and Romania has been relaunched after 17 years. Built over the last year, the track creates another connection to the EU for cargo and passenger transport. Next up, the latest news out of Russia and Belarus. Russian President Vladimir Putin has told workers that Russia is producing 3 times more anti-air missiles than the United States. He also claimed that the amount of various missiles produced by the Russian military industry can be compared with the entire world's missile production. During his speech for the commemoration of the 80th anniversary of the breaking of the siege of Leningrad, Putin further claimed that representatives of many European countries took part in the siege of Leningrad and committed crimes. I want to point out that Vladimir Putin often uses public events like this to propagate Kremlin propaganda. Vasily Nebenzia, Russia's permanent representative at the UN, blamed Ukraine for the tragedy in Dnipro, saying the Russian Kh-22 missile only hit the building because Ukrainian air defense shot it down. That claim was first made by now disgraced Oleksiy Arestovich, former non-staff advisor to the President's Office of Ukraine. Russian officials have used the story to deflect blame for the tragedy. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has compared his country with the Jews and likened the USA to Hitler and Napoleon. He justified his comments by pointing to Western politicians, saying Russia must suffer a strategic defeat in the war. He further called President Zelensky's 10-point peace proposal absolutely ridiculous and said all negotiations with Zelensky are out of the question. Ole Nikolenko, a spokesman for Ukraine's foreign ministry, said this clearly shows Russia is not interested in peace. The peace plan calls for a full Russian withdrawal, the return of all prisoners and deportees, food, energy and nuclear security, and justice for Russian war crimes, among other things. According to Ukraine's presidential advisor for children's rights and rehabilitation, Daria Hera-Symchuk, Ukraine managed to identify and verify data of at least 13,899 children who were abducted by Russian soldiers. Sadly, so far only 125 have been able to return home. The Russian embassy in Sweden has published a graphic to mock European countries for their high gasoline prices. The mockery attempt backfired when internet users pointed out that Crimea and the annexed territories were shown as part of Ukraine. And to wrap up the news segment, the international developments. Hungary has begun pressuring the EU to lift sanctions for 9 people, including businessmen and oligarchs close to Russian President Vladimir Putin. The Foreign Minister of Ukraine, Dmitry Kuleba, called this unacceptable. Instead, the next EU sanctions package should hit Russia even harder. Members of the European Parliament and the President of the European Council, Charles Michel, has called on Olaf Scholz, Chancellor of Germany, to provide Leopard tanks to Ukraine. Olaf Scholz, when asked about Berlin's reluctance to provide Ukraine with Leopard 2 tanks, responded by saying Germany has been among the biggest supporters of Ukraine. He also said, "We want to avoid this becoming a war between Russia and NATO." Should the German government decide to supply Ukraine with Leopard 2 tanks in the near future, it would be possible to hand over 10 to 15 repair tanks by the end of 2023. According to the Biden administration, additional Ukrainian aid could be announced as soon as the end of this week. It was not stated what would be included in the package, just that the US is trying to make sure Ukraine would receive what is needed for the fight. According to Politico, a new US military aid package for Ukraine, which is supposedly going to be announced on Friday, will likely include ground-launched small-diameter bombs. Those have a range of roughly 150 kilometers and can hit a target within a radius of 1 meter. Additionally, Politico mentions that the US is not expected to sign off on Abrams tanks due to logistic challenges. Meanwhile, the Wall Street Journal, citing a senior German official, reports Germany will not allow the export of tanks without the US sending its own first. According to documents on the government's website, Sweden is planning to announce the supply of 12 Archer self-propelled guns to Ukraine tomorrow. Canada will donate 200 Senator armored personnel carriers to Ukraine, the Canadian Defense Minister Anita Anand announced. The vehicles seat 12 people and are designed to resist 50 caliber rounds, explosions, and chemical, biological, and radiological hazards. The US is planning to provide Ukraine with $125 million for repairs to the power grid damaged by Russian attacks. USAID plans to use the money to buy backup power generators for the Kyiv's water and district heating systems, gas turbine supplies, and transformers. According to NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, this is a turning point in the war, and there is a need for a significant increase in support for Ukraine. If a peaceful solution through negotiations is to be achieved tomorrow, more weapons must be provided today. And now the daily intelligence updates, starting as usual with the UK Ministry of Defence. By the end of January 16, 2023, Ukrainian forces had highly likely withdrawn from the Donbas town of Soledar, leaving Russian military and Wagner Group proxy forces in control. Ukrainian forces have likely established new defensive lines to the west. Russia's advance on Soledar primarily consisted of Wagner forces and was a supporting operation aimed to enable the eventual envelopment of the larger settlement of Bakhmut. One of Ukraine's 2 main supply routes into Bakhmut is now under increasing pressure. Imagery shows that since the start of January 2023, the south and east of Bakhmut has continued to be subjected to intense artillery bombardment. Ukrainian forces almost certainly continue to defend against Russian forces on the outskirts of the city. Moving on to the latest assessment by the Institute for the Study of War. Russian President Vladimir Putin could announce a second wave of mobilization in the coming days and possibly as early as January 18th. The researchers suggest that Putin might make the announcement during the commemoration of the 80th anniversary of the lifting of the Leningrad siege. Putin is fond of using symbolic dates to address the Russian people, and some Russian pro-war mill bloggers noted that he will seize this opportunity to either declare mobilization or war with Ukraine, the institute writes. However, he has not made any statements regarding this during his speech today. Nonetheless, the Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu announced yesterday he will implement the order by President Putin to introduce military reforms and expand the army. Therefore, in my opinion, the suggested announcement by President Putin in the coming days remains likely. And to finish the report, the evening update by the General Staff of Ukraine. The enemy does not give up its intention to capture the Donetsk region within the administrative borders. The main efforts are concentrated on conducting an offensive in the Bakhmut direction. The enemy conducts unsuccessful offensive actions in the Avdiivka direction. In addition, he is trying to improve the tactical position in the Liman direction. In the Zaporizhia direction, the enemy carried out unsuccessful offensive actions in the areas of the settlements of Oryhiv and Huliai Pole. The enemy is defending in the Kupiansk, Novopavlivka and Kherson directions. Joint exercises of the air and space forces of the Russian Federation and the Air Force and Air Defense Forces of the Republic of Belarus are ongoing on the territory of the Republic of Belarus. Practical tasks on the interaction of air and ground components and offensive operations are being worked out. Russian occupying forces do not stop looting in the temporarily occupied territories. Thus, in the settlements of Gornostaivka, Kaire, Bratulyubivka, and Nizhny Zirogozy of the Kherson region, the occupiers, moving in groups of 10 to 15 people, search the empty homes of local residents and take away all household appliances and furniture. And that wraps up another one of our news reports. All articles mentioned have a link in the description. If you're interested in more details, please check them out. Thank you for tuning in and have a great day. You were listening to The Account. Slava Ukraini.